All right. It is 4 minutes past the hour, 2 o'clock here in Kenya, and I want to wish you all very welcome to today's session on that we call Unpacking Kenya's National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan, or the NBSAP, and looking at the interlinkage between biodiversity, policy influence, resilience, and climate action. This session will be recorded, and if you would have to leave early or for any other reason want to have a recording afterwards, you can reach out. For that reason, I have kept all of your cameras closed for those of you who are not speaking today, and also your microphones. But if you would wish to ask a question live later on in the session, you are welcome to use the raise hand function. You're also more than welcome to put any of your questions in the Q&A box that we have at the top left, I think, corner of your screens. You can also use the chat function. This session will be around 2 hours long, and we will start with our speakers giving their presentations, and then followed by a shorter Q&A session where you're all more than welcome to contribute. The ones organizing the webinar today is Kenya for Resilience, which is a network of almost now 300 registered members coming from civil society actors, government representatives, private sector, academia, and engaged individuals who in various ways engaged in resilience work all across Kenya's 49 counties. And together with us, we have partnered up with our close friends at WWF, World Wildlife Foundation, to lead this webinar on biodiversity and resilience today. And for many of you who are engaged in this space, we know that resilience is a very broad concept, and many of the members that we host work with resilience in so many different ways and intersecting ways. And one of those intersections is biodiversity. And that's the reason why we wanted to host a webinar on this very particular topic, because in some ways you can even call biodiversity our Earth's or our planet's natural defense systems against calamities or natural hazards such as floods, droughts, and so forth. And biodiversity entails a lot, and it concerns all of us around the globe. And later this year, the Convention on Biological Biodiversity, the CBD, will be taking place in Colombia, Latin America, where the main theme of the event is peace with nature for the sake of people and planet. So we were thinking a bit, how do we do that? And one way, I think, is through policy goals and targets. And that sets the frame for what we need to achieve and what we need to strive towards as a country and as a population. So one way to do that is to look at something called NBSAP, or our National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plans. And Kenya has very recently revised their own targets, and we thought that this was a good time for us to look into these targets and see what that means for the sake of Kenya, but also for the broader audience in the region. So to do that, I want to bring along our partners for today, WWF, and I would allow Faith to come in, who will be my co-facilitator of this event, to introduce herself, and World Wildlife Foundation briefly before we kick off this session. Welcome, Faith.
Thank you, Emma, for that great introduction into the webinar. My name is Faith Jalagat from WWF Kenya. WWF Kenya is Worldwide Fund for Nature, and I'm joined by my colleagues here. And at WWF Kenya, we have 5 main goals that we focus on, which is thriving wildlife, functioning habitats, ensuring people are benefiting, greening our footprint, ensuring that we have improved governance and organizational excellence. And I know my colleagues will be able to dive right into more details about this. I'm joined by two colleagues from WWF. We have an expert on policy who is Jonathan joining us, and he will be speaking a lot in regards to how civil society organizations can tap into this conversation and how non-state actors can be part of implementing this biodiversity plans for Kenya. And we will have Innocent Maloba, who's joining us from WWF International, and he'll be speaking on, the overall global biodiversity framework, which is the GBF, and the CBD, which is the Convention on Biological Diversity, and how that really ties into these biodiversity plans and why that is relevant for us to discuss. So I won't take much time, and I will hand it back over to you, Emma, so that we can then kick off into the discussions, and this is going to be a very exciting session. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Faith. And to start us off, I would like to invite Innocent, who I can see on the screen, who is a expert in multilateral affairs with WWF International. And we invited you along because we really want some help. Because whenever you are talking about the UN system, we always drown in acronyms. We have the NBSAPs, we have the CBD, the GBF, and all the other ones that you can come across whenever you try to engage in the global advocacy space for climate and biodiversity. So could you help us make sense of these acronyms a little bit and walk us through what it means before we talk about the NBSAP process in Kenya? Oops. I think you need to unmute yourself, Innocent.
Done that. Now, are you able to see my screen?
Yes, but you might want to go into presentation mode.
Yes,
that we see your screen.
That's precisely what. Yes, that's what I'm. I hope you can see it now.
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Yeah. So I have not so much time, so I will go straight into trying to break down on what these acronyms they mean. And I will start first of all, because when you're talking about the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, it's always important to start with the framework under which it was negotiated, and that is under the Convention on Biological Diversity. So we first of all start to unpack what the Convention on Biological Diversity is. And if you're in the global policy space, you might have lots of references to conventions. There's so many of them. In fact, it's very hard to keep a track of them unless you're just an expert on this. But there are three particular ones that were adopted in 1992 that are fairly common to most people, and that is the Framework Convention on Climate Change, the land degradation, the Convention on Combating Desertification, which focuses on land degradation and desertification. And then there's, of course, the Convention on Biological Diversity. So these three are referred to Rio Conventions. And I will now focus on the Convention on Biological Diversity, whose main objective was to be the framework convention that sets the principles and commitments on to guide member states in conserving global biodiversity. In terms of the membership, we have all member states of the UN and the EU.
Innocent?
Yes.
Apologies for interrupting you. I just want to let you know that you are still on the first slide for us, in case you have moved on in the presentation.
Yes, I'm already moved on the presentation, so I don't know how that. I don't know how to do that. Maybe I could stop and start again.
Yes, try to stop and start again, and then you can click on full screen.
All right. Okay, so there I am.
And then click on the little screen that looks like a TV. That one.
Okay, this one must be this one. So I say video. This one, I'm more used to Zoom than anything. Can you see it now?
Yeah.
Okay.
We see it, but I think we don't see it in full screen. So in case you have, in case you might have to share your screen and not just your window.
Okay, all right. Let me redo that.
Mhm.
So if I share my entire screen, basically what I'm seeing is
Then you
the-
open, yeah, and then you open the your
the
presentation.
Okay, all
Yeah.
right. That's okay, yeah. Okay, the
Yes.
plurality
Yes.
of technologies.
Yeah, there we
makes it
go. Now it
important.
looks perfect. Thank you
Okay,
so
great.
much.
Great. Thanks, Emma. Thanks, Emma. So now I was explaining that this convention has membership from all member states of the United Nations, with the exception of the United States of America and the Holy See. And there's also an exception with the EU being a party to the convention. The EU, as you know, is not a member state, but a regional institution. And the three objectives of the convention, we have the first one being conservation of biological diversity, the sustainable use of its components, of the components of biological diversity, and the third one, which focuses on the fair and equitable sharing of the benefits arising out of the use of genetic resources. It's important to keep a note of these objectives, because if you continue to engage in these, to interact with the convention, these are issues which will always pop up. In terms of how the decisions are made, there is a rules of procedure which pretty much guides how decisions are made, and by the established practice is that all the decisions are made by consensus. The main decision-making body is the Conference of Parties, the popularly known as COP, and COP meetings are biennial. We had meetings happening after every 2 years, except of course the COP15, which was held under difficult global public health circumstances, which I think culminated into a 4-year interval. So we had the important ones, for COP, the important recent ones, not the important ones, but the important reasons one, that is the COP14 in Sharm el-Sheikh, which set off a process that has led us to adopt the GBF. And then we had the COP15 happening in Kunming in China, and then substantively in Montreal, Canada, under China presidency. And the next COP is going to happen in October in Colombia. So typically, the COP meeting has two segments. We've got the high-level segment, which is ministerial, and then we've got a technical segment, which tackles the technical negotiations. I will not go into detail for that, because straight go on to what the technical segments are usually concerned about. And then also, it's important to look at the COP and see what, because when you talk, there's so many meetings, so people would always wonder, how do decisions get at the COP? Because if you go to the COP, let's say in Cali, Colombia, and you're interacting with a decision or an issue for the first time, it may be a bit lost on you on how it got even there. So what usually happens is that after every COP takes the decisions, they will set, those decisions would have additional decisions that require work by the subsidiary bodies. The two standing ones being the subsidiary body on scientific, technical, and technological advice, known as SABSTA, and the other one, the subsidiary body on implementation. So these will discuss these issues, prepare the documents that are adopted by these two subsidiary bodies become what the COP starts with as the basis for the decisions. So it's important to note that you don't just turn up the COP, you must keep a track of how agenda items and issues of concern are evolving through the subsidiary body meetings. So much that at this COP that is coming, you can almost tell the basis, the documents that are going to be tabled, what they are going to contain, because they were actually what was adopted by these two subsidiary body meetings, which coincidentally took place in Nairobi. So the outcomes of, now I go back to COP 15.2, is that we had a political outcome in the form of a declaration. But also importantly, there was a number of decisions taken by this COP. Key amongst them, and which we are going to talk about here, is the decision 15/4, which is the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. So this framework is the framework that is going to guide the global community in actions to restore and actually take actions to conserve biodiversity, with a mission of halting and reversing the loss of biodiversity by the year 2030. And it has several components, including a background and purpose, considerations for implementation, but also importantly the framework, the actual framework itself, which comprises of 4 2050 goals, as well as 23 targets, which are supposed to be implemented by the year 2030. So the mission of the framework is to take urgent action to halt and reverse biodiversity, to put nature on a path to recovery for the benefit of people and planet. Quite a mouthful, but again, quite important in terms of the components of everything that has, every word in that mission actually carries a lot of weight, and it represents a lot of it actually represents the amount of negotiations that went in to arrive at the framework. The 2050 vision, this one is unchanged, because this is the vision of the convention, where that in 2050 we'll have a world living in harmony with nature, where biodiversity is valued, conserved, restored, and widely used. So because of time, I will quickly run through the framework. We have the 3 objectives of the convention, comprising, or rather being represented by the 3 goals, the first 3 goals, that is ecosystems are maintained, enhanced, or restored, extinction rate and risk of all species halted, and genetic diversity of wild and domesticated species maintained. We've also got goal B, which focuses on the sustainable use, and then goal C, which focuses on how the monetary and non-monetary benefits arise from the genetic resources are going to be fairly and equitably shared, but also sustainably increased. And then there's also the important goal D, which focuses on the mobilization of the means of implementation, particularly a financial capacity building, as well as technical and scientific cooperation that is required to enable the achievement of the framework. And then we've got targets, 23 targets. I will not go through them, but just do a quick summary, in that these targets, because of time. So these targets, we have conservation targets, which are targets 1 to 8. And then we have targets 9 to 13, which are really focusing on how nature contributes to people's welfare. And then we've got targets 14 to 13, which are focusing on the enabling conditions. I quickly jump through the targets because I imagine that you must have already gone through them, but because of time.
Yeah, and actually I think Lucy will talk about the targets a bit as well. So yes, feel free to summarize them.
Yeah, yes, sure. And yeah, because I have a lot of minutes. So just a few minutes. But what I wanted to place the question of the NBSAPs so that you can see it, how it relates to the convention. So here we've got the convention, and then we've got these 10-year frameworks, which it has been 10-year frameworks that guide the implementation of a 10-year period. So for the current time, we've got what we have as what we call the Kunming-Montreal Biodiversity Framework as a global framework. and this is supposed to be implemented by parties through NBSAPs. So these NBSAPs are developed and they will be achieved through not only the conservation programs, but also mainstreaming of biodiversity and its action is to other sectors. But when the implementation of the NBSAPs is happening, there's a continuous process of the monitoring and evaluation. And these result into national reports, which are presented to the convention, but also inform national efforts, which includes the updating of plans, and it's a cyclical process. So this is also important to show, just to see how it relates to. And then I come to these frameworks. So I'll give a highlight that we had the first one covering the period 2002 to 2010. All these adopted by COP decisions. They're not just frameworks that are being implemented, but they actually carry a lot of weight because they're implemented. They are implemented by force of, or rather they're given force by decisions of parties meeting at the COP. So we've had the first one, the 2002 to 2010, taken through decision decision at COP6. And then we have the strategic plan for biological diversity covering the years 2011 to 2020, commonly known as the Aichi targets, taken by decision 10 by COP10. And then what we have on our hands right now is the Kunming-Montreal Biodiversity Framework, which was adopted by decision of 15/4 taken at the COP15 in Montreal. These frameworks are global, but action at national level is guided by NBSAP, so rather national biodiversity strategies and action plans. I'm afraid you have to get used to the NBSAP because it's quite a mouthful, and you need to get used to the acronyms. Otherwise, even if you're given a time to present, then it takes more time because you have to read throughout. And then all the parties are supposed to revise or update their national biodiversity strategies and action plans, because the case is that most of the parties had them before. And the idea was that after the adoption of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, these ones were to be updated or revised so that they are aligned with the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. And this was to be done before COP16. As it stands right now, the many parties, or I would say quite at least 66 parties had already provided their updates in one form or another. Many have provided the revised national targets, while a few have provided their complete NBSAPs. And this process of revision is supposed to be government-led, because it's mainly the primary responsibility is with government, and Lucy will speak to that. But it needs to be also participatory, and indeed there is a complete annex that was annexed to decision 15/6, which guides how this updating would actually take place. So yeah, I think I can stop there and just go to the last slide, which talks about the, in the cycle, what is going to be expected is that, for instance, we can see by 2024, we were expected to have all parties submit their NBSAPs, and this will be followed by also the period of the 7th national report. I think the previous report was the 6th national report, but then there will be the global review, which will take place in 2026, which is going to be COP17. And it is hoped that at this point, the global review will give us an idea of how far or near we are to achieving the mission of the 2030 targets in the framework, as well as the mission. And that should automatically mean that if we are not on track, then action will be needed to close that, both in terms of increasing action on the action targets, but also making sure that the means of implementation are equally augmented to meet that. And of course, in COP18, there will also be an ambition analysis of the ambition, and we hope that by the time we're coming to COP19. The review that is the review that is going to be done on the progress is going to be a positive one, indicating that actually the parties all parties are on course to meet the 2030 targets. So Emily, I can stop here. Perhaps maybe address
thank
any
you
gaps
so
in the
much.
form of question. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Innocent. And this is a really good start for us. And for those of you who are coming in, dropping in the past few minutes, welcome to our webinar. And for those of you who have been part of the Innocent's whole intervention and feel a bit intimidated, like, oof, what is this? There is so much theory, so much work. Don't worry. The purpose of the webinar today is to unpack everything that comes with the biodiversity action plans and strategies, and everything that comes with Convention of Biological Diversity. So we will do our best to make you feel comfortable and secure with all of these things. But we thought, even though it's a little bit tricky and complex, that it's always better to start with the complicated stuff, because that's where you have your most focus. So thank you so much, Innocent, and we will come back with some questions for you later. But before I let our next speaker in, I just wanted to open up a little poll, because now we have started looking into what biodiversity means and does in terms of policy and frameworks and terminologies. But as we move into the second part, which is localizing the NBSAPs and biodiversity frameworks into Kenya, I would want to know a little bit from you guys in the audience what you think about biodiversity. So I have launched a poll. I hope you can see it on your screens, where I am asking you to share one word that just comes to mind when you think about biodiversity. And while I wait for you to share a few words, then I will invite Lucy to come on screen, and then I will introduce you.
Emma, you may want to clarify that the poll is on the chat. Otherwise, some of us were waiting for you to share your screen. Thank you.
Okay, yes, the poll is on the chat. Thank you so much, Mary. For me, it popped up as into my screen. That's why I could see it. But I'm seeing it's life, conservation, ecosystem restoration, things, job, and life. I love that. And with that, I will invite our next speaker, who is no other and none the less than Dr. Lucy Nganga, who is the Deputy Director of Multilateral Environmental Agreements at the Ministry of Environment, Climate Change and Forestry. And we're so happy to have you here today, because I know, Lucy, that you have been at the very forefront of working on these biodiversity targets and many other multilateral agreements within your work. And for those of you who live in Kenya, which I think is most of you, even though not all, we know that Kenya is one of the most biodiverse countries in the world, with something around 35,000 species of flora and fauna that can be found in the country. And it's really the backbone of both livelihoods, agriculture, as well as supporting tourism and communities across the 47 counties. And just a few weeks ago, Kenya launched, or revised, I should say, its NBSAP, its National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan. And I know that you were a big part of that one. So I would want to invite you to come in and speak to us a little bit about what is it that you have done and your ministry have done when it comes to Kenya's commitments to biodiversity protection, and how does this NBSAP work really on a practical level and within the policy level here in Kenya. So welcome, Lucy.
Thank you very much, Emma. Thank you. It's great to be here among a number of people that we are already familiar with each other. We've been in this process together. Speaking after one expert, Innocent, it's always gratifying because for sure he has covered some grounds of things that maybe I was thinking of whether to say to give the link, but that was a very good decision to have him speak before me. And thank you very much, Innocent, because you always are able to unpackage these very, like Emma says, sometimes confusing discussions. But never mind the abbreviations and all that, Emma, but with time you get used to them, and you get, once you start understanding the process. You'll allow me to exit the video, but
no problem.
okay,
I
thank you very
have
much.
started sharing your screen, Lucy. I hope you can see it.
I can. I hope everybody else in the world is able to see that, and we can go to the next one. Yeah, I can see people, confirming they can see. That's just an outline of what we are going to speak to. We, like Innocent said, because of time limitation, we'll try just to highlight, and because we are unpackaging, I hope we'll get another forum now to deep dive. So I'll just go into a bit of background. Some of it Innocent has spoken into. Look at the adoption. I think this also has been covered by Innocent, and maybe spend a bit of time in the process that Kenya is undertaking. And Emma, you said we've just revised our NBSAP. I need to make a correction. What we have completed is the national target and submitted, but actually, you are right, we are in the process of also revising the NBSAP, and then look a bit at the implementation arrangement. Next. So a quick background, really. Next slide. Yeah. Now this is what I'm saying, that Innocent has really spoken into this. Okay, you've jumped to the third one. Okay, so I need not to the Aichi and the target story. I think Innocent has spoken into that, but I must also mention that this plan of coming up with a strategic plan for biodiversity provided an overarching framework for biodiversity, and parties agreed to translate this to what now they call the NBSAP. And this is what is subject of periodic review to implement the COP decision. And in one point also, Innocent spoke into this. And that's why he said you have to get familiar with NBSAP, because this is the strategy that will always be revised to implement the COP decision. Next. Okay, yeah. So as I outlined, the Article 26 of the Convention and the national reports, and Innocent has also spoken into this. We are now at 6th report, which we have already, parties have already reported to, and he has given even the roadmap as to when we are expected to do our 7th national reports. These are meant to provide information on the measures taken for the implementation of the convention. So, colleagues, I want you to get it that the NBSAP is the one that implements the convention decision, and the national reports come back and now report on the measures that have been taken to implement the convention. I've always had people confused, why do we have a national report and also we have an NBSAP? That's how they follow each other. One is to report the other, and the NBSAP also is the tool that implements the convention decision. So the Aichi target, of course, performance globally was rated low, and if you go online, you'll see how each of the targets globally was performed, how they performed, and even by parties, you can as well find how each country that submitted their reports, how they performed against the targets that were set in the Aichi. Hence, the initiation of the post-2020 GBF, which has actually very heavily borrowed from the Aichi targets. The fact that they were not well fully achieved, then, and of course, we are the same people in the group that had also set them aside. They were carried forward to the GBF, but of course, there was a lot of course, refining and updating because of, the dynamics of the emerging issues, and unpackaging them maybe to be more clearer, to enhance the implementation. Next. So the COP decision, again, I think this was also spoken into the COP decision. I don't want to repeat that. I want to go to the targets have been spoken about, but Emma talked that I'll come into the targets, looking at what Innocent has presented and summarize how the targets were framed. The 23 targets, which I may also not have time to discuss them individually. Innocent has very well clearly categorized them into the 3 groups of the conservation group from 1 to 8, the nature contribution to people and enabling conditions. But in the COP language, the categorization is that target 1 to target 8 are the ones that are considered for reducing threats to biodiversity. And then and that's where you find a lot of conservation subjectives, target 1, 2, 3, all going down. And then target 9 to 13 is the one that talks about or covers meeting people's needs through sustainable use and benefit sharing. So of course, after conservation, we also, our livelihoods are also, engraved in the biodiversity. Now, target 14 to 23, this is also very important because this is where the tools and solutions for implementation and mainstreaming are found. And you'll find that as a country, and I think in one of the bullets I must have mentioned that as a ministry, our target, and I've always mentioned this when we go to meetings, every entity, individual, community, organization, we must look through the 23 targets and find out which is the target that we want to take over. As a ministry, we want to take over, not to take over, but we want to align ourselves very much with the target 14 because experience of the previous Aichi target is that when you don't integrate the targets into your strategies and policies, when you don't mainstream them through, you don't mainstream them even through like in our governance structure from national to county levels, you continue talking about conservation and management and all that, but mainstreaming and integration is key. And one example I always give is that at national level, when climate change discussions started coming in this country, and those of you from 2010, you realize when we did our climate change strategy, the National Treasury was still warming up to this idea. Fast forward today, when the National Treasury now was engaged and got to understand this, and they started now, when they are developing the MTEF, the medium-term expenditure framework, they have mainstreamed climate change in that document. And you realize that's why in the National Treasury today, we have a climate change unit. We have the biggest funded project of ROCA based in the National Treasury. So as a ministry, we want to take the biodiversity discussion to that level, where as the MTEF gets developed, it is integrated, it integrates and mainstream biodiversity so that there are resources that don't just come to do stuff, but they also, as they do other things, developmental things, environmental aspects, they are also like targeted to cover biodiversity restoration. And that way then it will be able to, even when the monitoring and planning and reporting, it is easier to pick it out. Today, you can, through the National Treasury, you can follow up on how much climate financing has come to Kenya, what it has done, and what it is doing. We would want to get to that level. That's why we are talking of target 14, like, a key target for us as a ministry. But of course, other departments of government will pick up other targets. I know my colleagues from State Department of Wildlife, they'll pick what, resonates with their functions and mandate. And because the Ministry of Environment is more of a coordinating ministry, then the more reason we should spearhead this element of like just making sure that we can have a language that is in our Apex development documents that speaks to this. So this roadmap essentially was for the nation to halt and reverse biodiversity loss with the key objective of to restore at least 30 of the degraded terrestrial and inland and marine ecosystem by 2030. Of course, that is the famous 30 by 30. And each contracted party, of course, Kenya is one of that, is expected to review or revise their NBSAP and align them to the KNGBF. So okay.
Sorry, am I on the right slide for you, Lucy?
I went off a bit. I don't know whether it was also on your screen. Nevertheless, no, we go back to
implementation.
Back to speaks to NBSAP review in Kenya.
Mm-hmm. Here you go.
NBSAP, perfect, yeah. I was almost drawing my slides now. NBSAP review in Kenya, because I think this is where, as a country, of course, we have embarked in the review process, but first and foremost, Kenya is in the process of reviewing that and aligning to the KMGBF. KMGBF now is the Communing Montreal Global Diversity Framework. We no longer now go to the full name. So revised support has been received from Jeff through UNEP for what we are calling the early action support project. And this one, what it has done, it has given us resources to do what we are calling a rapid review of the earlier NBSAP, the one that is 2019-20. It was meant to be 2019-2030, but of course, in between now we are doing another one. We will call it 2040, 2024, whatever year, to 2030. And this support, even though it's there, we must at least take note that we had support from our partners locally, especially the international NGOs. And the key of them, of course, is WWF, IUCN, TNC. They came in handy. In fact, I must admit that were they not there for their support, we could maybe not have been able to have our targets ready for submission by 1st of August. So, I mean, we are appreciative of that partnership. The national targets have already been deposited, and I think that's a stride we have made. We have not been able to finalize the NBSAP. We are in the process of doing that. We have tried to, in our circles, to say we'll give ourselves maybe the Christmas gift of an NBSAP before we break the year, but we'll see how that unfolds. So the process of embracing the whole of government or of society approach through the NBSAP stakeholder forum that has been involved in revising the targets and will continue doing the NBSAP review. You must remember that in one of the decision annexes there's a provision on how this whole of government, whole of society should engage. Because looking at the failure of achieving the Aichi targets, some of the reasons that were given apart from the funds, some of the main reasons were the framework of reporting and engagement of stakeholders, the inclusivity, lack of inclusivity. And that is something this time around we have really not tried, but we have really embarked to it. So alongside the NBSAP review, we are also developing the monitoring systems and a resource mobilization strategy. And these are some of the areas where the early action support resources from Jeff through UNEP is supporting us to do this. Next. So the implementation arrangement.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's okay. Yeah, it's come. It has come. Yeah. Oh. Okay.
Oh, you want this one? Sorry.
Yeah, that's right. The previous slide. Okay, I can use my slides then.
Mm-hmm.
So the implementation arrangement and commitments for Kenya, we are saying that a national biodiversity coordination mechanism has been launched. This again also partners came in handy, led by the IUCN. This entity is meant to do the coordination. I said the Ministry of Environment mainly. Our role is to do the coordination, and we have appreciated that coordinating all the entities from communities up to the bottom up, like they say, from communities all the way to the ministries and departments and counties. It's not easy. We need an entity that is able to do that. So just a month ago, we launched a national biodiversity coordination mechanism, which is an overarching, with an overarching goal to facilitate and enhance coordination of the biodiversity-related activities. And this was coming through because stakeholders continued to meet, and looking at the past performance failures and successes, this was felt like it needed to be there so that it assists in the coordination. The key objective, of course, is to coordinate the policies, the fostering partnership, mainstreaming, like I said, with mainstreaming across sectors and development plans is key, and also enhancing resource mobilization. Of course, resources are very key in this because without, again, resources, you'll find even the issues of capacity building and others that are in the targets, in the last bracket of the targets, they will be supported by the target therein of 19, where the resource mobilization discussions are put. Therefore, an NBSAP implementation framework will be developed, and this is going to happen once we have completed the, just a second.
All good, Lucy?
Sorry about that. So
no problem.
No, yeah, I had to fix up something. So where was I? So the key objectives of this framework coordination mechanism is, to ensure that the coordination around the policies, the partnership, mainstreaming biodiversity across sectors, and I was, trying to emphasize the need for resource mobilization. Remember, in the RS support that we are getting from Jeff, one of the 4 consultancies that we are embarking on is to develop a resource mobilization strategy. Because those of you who participated in the negotiations, it was clear that we need to, to source funds from all sources. All sources then requires that not just, looking at partners and maybe the exchequer, but we have to be very innovative in the way we look for resources, bringing in private sectors, ensuring that the communities also understand how they bring in their game into this, in terms of not just the money in terms of the monetary itself, but also supporting in the restoration in the best way they know how, because they too are beneficiaries, and that awareness is very important. So this framework, this mechanism, therefore, for us, it's very important. The ministry will give, and I was talking about the NBSAP implementation framework. That is the one that once the NBSAP is ready and rolling, the ministry is already in the works to coordinate and reaching out to have an implementation framework developed to guide and bring together stakeholders for implementation. And this is where I find many partners asking, how are we going to plug in into implementing the NBSAP, all of us together? So those of you who have developed strategies know that if you develop a strategy and then you develop an implementation framework and you annex it into a strategy, sometimes it gets lost there. And therefore, we don't want to annex our implementation framework in our NBSAP. We want to finish the, developing the NBSAP, and then we purposely now call even a bigger stakeholder on the table, and we do a national implementation framework for our NBSAP. That way, the partners and the stakeholders, let me call them stakeholders, will each take their targets and implement. And in this implementation framework, we'll go all the way to not just implementation, but also to reporting, so that, remember, KMGBF has a very big mandate of responsibility to report through the framework of reporting that is there, and which will be finalized at CARI during the COP. And that happening as a ministry, therefore, we need an implementation framework that does the implementation, follow up on the, the actual action on the ground, verifying, and then amassing that data, and then reporting through our clearinghouse mechanism that is housed in NEMA. So I'm emphasizing on the implementation framework because this is an area where we ask ourselves, after finalizing the NBSAP, so what? So this is where we shall be calling for everybody to really plug in. And if your target is target 4, target 2, target 1, then or several targets and different communities coming together and to do that. And I'll give an example of what ICLAF is doing with the CCOP. They are already working on target 2. Those of you who attended SAPSTA 20, it was SAPSTA 25, will remember that ICLAF launched a number of activities there where they are really working on target 2. They have already plugged into the ministry and most of the Department of Forestry, who have also developed a restoration framework, and that is going so well. So our desire is that once the NBSAP is ready, we can all now plug into the targets that are resonating with our institution's mandate. And then the ministry will be there with the coordination framework, plugging in to find out who is doing what, where, and then what is happening, what are the gains, and then we can report on that. Not just the global reporting, but even as our institutions, we report, and we also report at a national level, so that we can also convince the powers of the day that biodiversity is important and it needs support, not just from partners and donors, but also even from our own resources and the taxes that we pay. So as I had talked about the target 14, that the ministry will give greater emphasis on, because of the need to integrate and mainstream. What other stakeholders will be embarking on the other 22 targets, then I think us will be there trying to coordinate and bringing it home. So maybe the last slide, I think. So then the other question that mostly comes is the commitment. The commitment are in many fronts, because even as we speak, even in our national budgets and everything, you'll find, even though we can't isolate because of the mainstreaming clarity not being there, we still appreciate up to now our government have also been putting resources into the biodiversity protection. But I guess when we do a well-structured integration and mainstreaming, we'll be able to map out more clearly for value. But of course, Kenya commitment to the biodiversity protection in demonstrating the number of multilateral is demonstrated by the number of multilateral agreements related to this that have been ratified. I've given a few examples there, especially a few of them, most of them are domiciled here. The Rio Conventions are all domiciled at the Ministry of Environment. The others are with our other colleagues in government, and the others that are not mentioned here. But you'll find the number of multilateral, or what we call mayors, related to biodiversity that we have ratified as a country is a commitment of that. And then the other now commitment comes through the review of the NBSAP, that bringing everybody on board, the whole society, whole government approach, and the engagement, and therefore together we can do what we need to do and restore biodiversity. Emma, I think that was my last slide.
Thank you so much, Lucy. And for everyone online, you can give Lucy, and I actually forgot to give Innocent a round of digital applause as well. Thank you so much for coming in and sharing your expertise from your many, many years of working with both the NBSAPs and other multilateral environmental agreements, Dr. Lucy. I also know from conversations we've had now recently that you are, I think you might have even already gone into your retirement, but you have come back to join us today to give us some of your valuable insights. So I really want to appreciate you for coming in today. Thank you so much. And I would also want to check in with those of you who are online, if you are still with us. So if you are, feel free to write a question to Lucy or Innocent in the chat box, or in any other way, use the reaction function. You can find them at the top corner to send a applaud or a like or a love notification, so that we know that you are still with us. And we now, for the last hour of our session today, we would like to take this down, not only from the global, not only from the national, but actually from the ground level, talking about how biodiversity intersects with all of our works, and how we as non-governmental actors can engage with these processes, because I know that's something that most of you have noted as a question, or something that you would really want to learn more about when registering for this event today. But first off, I would like to invite our colleague Mary Githomi, who is the Country Director of International Aid Services Kenya, and also chairperson of the Kenya for Resilience Board. And because for many of us, who, especially those of us who are members of Kenya for Resilience, but also those who are working in other intersecting fields, we might have a special interest in these linkages. So how does biodiversity link with other sections like disaster resilience, climate change adaptation, and disaster prevention, and so forth. And to address this, I wanted to speak to you, Mary, about how you see this from your side as a leader of a national network on resilience, which is, understanding resilience in the broad terms, in its intersections. And how can we, on the ground level, work on addressing these intersecting issues of biodiversity, resilience, and climate into our work? And how can we foster more collaboration and cross-learning within these fields? So I have invited my colleague Paris to share your screen. I hope that's okay, Mary, and feel free to put on your camera and join us.
Thank you. Confirm I'm audible?
Yes, you are. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Emma, and thank you, Lucy. Thank you, Innocent. When I listen to Lucy, I feel a bit intimidated, actually, because when she talks about the global issues that are happening, I'm so appreciative just to know that even as Kenya for Resilience, we don't just do things here in Kenya, but we are also interconnected in what is happening globally. So as Emma said, I'm bringing now what Lucy is saying, I'm bringing it now down to what has been happening in Kenya, and especially when it comes to the issue of resilience and biodiversity. And I wanted to give some disclaimer when it comes to Kenya for Resilience before I even dive into who is Kenya for Resilience and where we are coming from, the journey, and where we are headed. I wanted to say that Kenya for Resilience is a 100% community-led efforts. We don't do anything without a community, and we look into the youth groups, women groups, we look into indigenous people because of the knowledge. We look at persons who are able differently, and I wanted also to add that communities are our core. Everything we do, they are our core targets. And I also wanted to add that biodiversity and resilience are Siamese twins. Unfortunately, in Kenya, as Dr. Lucy have said, most of the things, especially the ones that are led by the government, because of different ministries, they run in silos. And I remember when we met with Dr. Lucy, we realized that one can actually not do without the other. So we are completely community-led. And as I take us through what we have been doing as Kenya for Resilience, bringing things down to the local level, even as by the time I finish, I will also show you how Kenya for Resilience has given birth. I give it this beautiful girl called Kenya for Resilience that has kept on giving birth. So Paris, if you click the button, the journey will appear, how the journey has been from 2018 all the way to 2024. And I would like to say that this journey, just stop there. This journey began in 2018 when Swedish Mission Council invited all the partners that they were funding at that time. And this workshop took place in Kenya at the Adventist University. And the actors that were actually Kenyans and non-Kenyans sat together, and we were challenged by Swedish Mission Council. Then they asked us, why don't you form a community of practice? So who is Kenya for Resilience? We are a community of practice where members learn from each other on resilience matters. We are over 300 members, both individuals and organizations, national and international, and we work together with the government and academia. Next slide. Paris? Yes, so here at Kenya for Resilience, we actually have what we call, okay, there, just stop there. Kenya for Resilience, we look at local-led hubs, and we are in different counties. You'll be seeing how different counties have been doing resilience work. We do have advocacy platforms, And in these platforms, we actually amplify the local voices. We have platforms for collaborations where we want to make sure that we are working together, especially in consortiums. We also do joint fundraising, and we also have forum for capacity building. And in this way, we are able to capacity build different CSOs in different ways, but mostly on resilience matters. We want to do co-learning. We want to exchange experience and knowledge together. Next. Kenya for Resilience, we have leadership. And in this leadership, we actually have a board. I am privileged to be the chair for the second term running. And I'm not the chair is actually Mary. It is actually the organization, International Aid Services. And we will be giving it to another entity come next year because we are serving the second time. I wanted to say that we have a board, and in this board, it's we actually coming from different counties with different experiences. So the board is fully fledged with organizations, which we have a treasurer, we have the secretary, we have members, and we come from different counties, all the way from Mombasa County to Turkana County. I would also wanted to say that when we began in 2018, Children Mission Africa, that is CMA, was actually the secretariat, and they were able to share the secretariat from 2018 to 2023. I know we moved a bit in 2024, a few months, but now we've given it to LM International, where Emma is working. We have strategic partners, especially with academia and the government. And even in the government itself, we actually have different ministries which we work together because we believe that we need to work with the government and other stakeholders, partners, to be able to meet our objective. We also have a strategy that we are actually running. It is 5 years, and we've already given it a bit of a review, and we realize that we are actually on the right track. Our county hubs are in different counties. We have Nairobi County, Samburu County, Tana River County, and we have also Turkana County. Next slide. And as you move through the next slide, you realize that Kenya for Resilience, we have a framework, and in this framework, we do joint fundraising. We also support local hubs, the resilience hubs. We have the capacity building for the CSOs. We have advocacy platform. And the reason for all this is to make sure that we have absorption, adaptability, and transformation to the communities. Because as I said at the beginning, communities are our core target. We work with the communities, local led, 100%. Next slide. Because communities are the ones that are always affected with the crisis. When the shocks and crises come, they are the ones that are mostly affected. Here, I will go very quickly just to say that how we collaborate with each other. We actually have webinars together. Like today, we also have science cafes, and we have exposure visits. And some of the counties that members have been able to visit, we've gone to Samburu, we've gone to Tharaka Nithi County, Machakos, where we visited Christian Impact Mission. For the Kenyans, you know Bishop Masika's center in Yatta. That is where some of our members have gone several times. We've gone to Kirinyaga, Moyale, and Mandera County, as well as Tana River counties. Next slide. So we want to keep on collaborating, building each other. As Kenya for Resilience, we just there. We participate in local, county, community level, as well as global platforms. So my first photo there, you can see we were in Kisumu County, where we actually participated in the IDDR Day. The next one, you realize that our members actually went for COP28 in Dubai. And before then, we had actually participated in the GP in Switzerland and in Indonesia. So we are not just locally, but we also participate in global events. Next slide. This is because even as we participate in global events, we realize we cannot work in silos. We have to keep on connecting to what is happening globally. These are the local hubs, as I mentioned, and we look at the interests of the communities and of the county. And for the Kenyans, you know that we have the county integrated targets or strategies, what we call CIDPs. We always make sure that we are aligned, and we want to bring stakeholders together across multiple levels, because we realize that we need to work with everyone to be able to meet our objectives. Next slide. So that was Samburu County, the photo you've seen. We were in Samburu and were able to work with a self-help group, even as we were able to give them a water tank. For you to be able to join Kenya for Resilience, even if you're not a Kenyan, because we are represented actually globally, even if the Kenya for Resilience is basically Kenya, but we are moving to Africa and the region and globally, is that you'll be able to network with different partners. There is a lot of joint advocacy. We do capacity building. We pass on knowledge, peer learning, on matters on environment and resilience, and we do joint resource mobilization through consortium. We encourage our members to actually come together as consortiums. You can be 2, you can be 7. Next slide. As many as you can. We encourage as many members as possible to form consortiums. These are some of the achievements that we have been able to achieve. We were able to localize the DRR agenda, and through the county hubs, as I said earlier, we have advocated for inclusion of the voices in Kenya on climate change bill. We've been able to participate in the national DRM, and personally, plus other members, we were actually able to participate in the DRM in Kenya, the strategy for disaster risk reduction, and we were actually able to have our voice. And when that document is signed, I'm glad to say that you shall see Kenya for Resilience being able mentioned. We have been able to participate in the SEDAI mid-term review. We were able to bring the voices of our people in the international platforms like IDDR, Stockholm Plus 50 in 2022. And we've also been able to strengthen the resilience programming by policy formulation. We are squarely involved, and we've also been able to grow and scale up Kenya for Resilience. And now we have a BB called Africa for Resilience, which I'll just mention as I finish. Next slide. Because we want to replicate the good work we have done in Kenya. In 2020, from 2020 to 2023, we actually, there is a baby that was born called Kenya for Resilience Consortium, where 7 members of Kenya for Resilience came together. That is Children Mission Africa, IS Kenya, where I work, Salvation Army, Life and Peace Institute, PMU, ADRA, and ERICS. We came together and we were challenged by our donor Swedish Mission Council and said, you people, you're doing a good job. Why don't you just come together and form a consortium? We did, and it was funded by SMC, and we were able to run a whole phase over 3 years, and we were able to take our work to Samburu, Tana River County, and Nairobi counties. And you can actually go to our website and see the documentary we did for the consortium, and everything was handled at the human rights way. And we are looking forward actually to have more consortiums to be able to work together and have more impact on our objectives. Next slide. So Kenya for Resilience have been giving birth since it was born in 2018.
Mary, just making you aware of the time, not to interrupt you, just to make sure you're able to also mention the biodiversity and
yes,
resilience linkage.
Absolutely. Thank you. So this is a baby called Africa for Resilience, and we are looking forward to go into the region. We want to begin with Tanzania, Uganda, and Burkina Faso. replicating our good learnings from Kenya to the region. Next slide. Because we want to build our successes. These are the plans for Africa for Resilience. Next slide. Because basically we are replicating what we have been learning from Kenya. And this is the way forward for Africa for Resilience. Next slide. I want now to bring the linkage between now the resilience through Kenya for Resilience and biodiversity. We converge the two, resilience and biodiversity. We are saying that biodiversity enhances the ecosystem resilience in the face of climate change. Dr. Lucy said that when it comes to the issues of climate change, there has been a lot of hype, and even the funding has been coming a lot for the climate change. But when it comes to biodiversity, as I said at the beginning, these are like Siamese twins. One cannot run in one direction and the other one in the opposite direction. The two must be able to speak together, because when you look at the diverse ecosystem, it's able to support each other, and we are able to actually mitigate the issues of climate change. Hence, we have community, we build communities resilience. So that is the convergence. And you can become a member. The last slide, you can become a member by visiting Kenya for Resilience website. And once you approved, there is actually a WhatsApp group where you get instant updates. The last slide. So the last slide is just basically how we can be able to join. And that marks the end of my presentation. And back to you, Emma.
Thank you so much, Mary. Great presentation, and give her a big digital applause. I can see some coming in, and thank you to all of you who have shared your questions and comments in the chat. To go straight into our final speaker for today, and I think something that many of us have waited for quite a bit in this session, which is how do we as non-governmental actors in different ways engage with these NBSAP processes, either if we are a small local grassroots or community-led organization in Turkana, or if we are a large part of a large INGO with our office in Nairobi. We all have different strengths, different needs and interests that should be covered and should be acknowledged in processes around biodiversity. And therefore, I would want to invite my dear friend Jonathan Odongo, who also works with WWF Kenya as a project officer with special focus on policy and civil society partnerships. And I know that you have been part and parcel of this process of engaging with the NBSAP process and engaging with the government of Kenya in working on these. But for us who are not so regularly attending these global or national policy processes, or have spaces to influence, we would want to know what we can do to engage with them and see that we see the targets flying and seeing its success. So, Jonathan, please walk us through how we can, in different ways, do that. And I see that you have already shared your screen. Thank you so much for that.
Yes, thank you so much, Emma. Can you confirm if I'm audible?
Yes, you're audible. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So, I mean, it's indeed an honor to speak after the giants, all the way from Innocent's presentation on the CBD and GBF. I mean, I'm doing this intentionally because we've been asked to learn how to live with the abbreviations. to Dr. Lucy breaking down the NBSAP, and who has also been quite instrumental in leading the process and leading us and making this process as engaging as possible. And I'm pretty sure we've gathered from her presentation the term whole of government, whole of society approach. Which means looking at the government as a whole, all the ministries, and bringing the society that might not necessarily be part of the government formation together. So to Mary's presentation on the linkage between biodiversity and resilience. So I want to go quickly to what we can do. The CSOs, normally when we look at some of these documents, there are two terms that are used interchangeably, and that is the non-state actors and CSOs. And today, at least, we'll be able to learn how the rest of us can play a part in this. So in the meantime, I hope we all remember the CBD, CCD, UNFCCC, the Substar and SBI. And then there is the NBCM that Lucy mentioned, that is the National Biodiversity Coordination Mechanism. And then also we have, I mean, all the terminologies that we can remember. So, I mean, the abbreviations, sorry. Now, I want to move quickly to, kindly let me know, Emma, if the presentation is moving.
Yes, it's moving. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. So initially wanted to look at now who is a non-state actor, and then how who is a civil society organization in this case. But I'm pretty sure we all know what this means. It basically means entities that are not directly affiliated with or established by the government or represent a government. So that brings on board the civil society organizations, the private sector, including businesses. We have independent media, we have faith-based organizations, all the entities that are not within that government space. And then the civil society organization now has the connotation. Now, in this case, when we talk about the CSOs, we are speaking about a non-profit group, of course, non-governmental. We have the non-profit group, but of course also often associated with fighting for causes. So when we hear the term CSO, we often associate CSOs with advocacy and policy to an extent. We've seen the maandamanos, but advocacy strategies are different. So it depends on how we go about conducting our advocacy. So what is a characteristic? What are some of the characteristics of a CSO? So as we can see, as we've said, they're non-profit. And then there is that association with policy advocacy, and then also the connection with the community. So why CSO is important, it's good to quickly skim through. When we hear about promoting good governance and accountability, when we hear about promoting justice and equity, these are often terms that we find within the civil society organization space. When we hear things about advancing human rights or human rights-based approach in whatever we do, environmental sustainability, the term capacity building is often common. So education, capacity building, and promoting all that, facilitating community development. So these are all activities, items that are associated with the work that CSOs do. So basically supporting processes that are out there, influencing public policies and opinions. Of course, that is also another element, and working closely with the local communities. So what is the role of the CSOs in the NBSAP implementation? So we've seen the structure and how NBSAPs were born, from Innocent's presentation all the way connecting to Lucy's, and what we are doing nationally. The revision process is still ongoing. Before we dive into what CSOs can do, I wanted to let those who are wondering where we can find the targets, Kenya's targets, the NBSAP targets, where do we go, and how do we connect the global biodiversity framework targets to the national biodiversity strategy and action plan targets. So one, if you want to know the simple, quickest way to get to the global biodiversity framework targets, normally you'll see the top of the screen, there is the GBF target. So you go to Google and just search GBF targets. the first link that will appear, the 2030 targets with guidance notes, will take you straight to this page. So you can look at the targets in this page here. To the right of the screen, you'll see 2030 targets quick access. So that takes you to target 1, 2, 3. If you want to find the details about each and every target of the global biodiversity framework, then that is where you go. So from there, you'll be able to see the detailed information about what the targets are about. You'll be able to see the indicators and so on and so forth. And then now there is the next thing that we need to do to get to Kenya's targets. As Dr. Lucy mentioned, Kenya submitted the national targets by August 1st, which was the deadline. So then you will find that on the online reporting tool. That is, the online reporting tool is by the Convention on Biological Diversity at the website. So the simplest way is online reporting tool, ort.cbd.int. That is where you get the online reporting tool. But if you go to CBD website, that is the cbd.int, then at the bottom of the page, you'll be able to see now the online reporting tool. Click that, it will bring you to this page that you're seeing right here. And then looking at the page where you see the national targets, that is the third box from the left, national targets. So you can see 1,810 national targets, 67 parties. Now, if you click that, it will bring you to this interface here. Now, you'll be able to see, you are able to see the filters: record type, countries, global targets, regions, global goals, and so on and so forth. If you want to find the targets by countries, you go to the country, then key in. So Kenya, if you want to check Kenya's national targets, you go to that section and then just type Kenya, you will see Kenya, and then the targets will be listed. Now, if you want to filter further and see what national target is in relation to the global target, then you go to the global target filter. Then if it is target 1, at the global level, what does it say? At the national level, what do we have? So do our targets align to what degree to the global target? So that is how we get to see, for those who've been asking, where do we find Kenya's targets? And Dr. Lucy mentioned that we are still working on, as a country, we are still working on the national biodiversity strategy and action plan that will be finalized hopefully before the end of the year. And then now, but we are able to see the targets and how we can align our work with the national targets as we wait for the rest of the document to be ready. So how do we take part in the implementation of the NBSAP as the civil society? One, we need to look at the ambition. So I've showed you the process and how you can get to the Kenya's targets. So we can look at the Kenya's targets in relation to the global targets, the GBF, and then compare. So are we ambitious enough? Are our targets ambitious enough? So will Kenya's NBSAP be ambitious enough to drive meaningful and impactful biodiversity efforts? Two, let's look at alignment and contribution. Now, all of us, those working with organizations, we have our work plans, we have activities, we have our goals and objectives. So how do we align when we look at Kenya's targets? When we look at the global targets, we even have the indicators. So how do we align our activities and objectives and goals with the global biodiversity framework, with the national biodiversity strategy and action plan? So this will also help us with the reporting and contributing to, at some point, Innocent and also Dr. Lucy spoke about the national reports. And also at some point, Dr. Lucy mentioned clearinghouse mechanism. And that is the reporting at the national level, how StatNEMA, as was mentioned earlier. So then after aligning, we will be able to, when there is what we call the voluntary national review. So non-state actors, including the CSOs, are allowed to take part in the reporting. So we can also have commitments as civil society organizations, and then report in line with our commitment. So this is a conversation that is still ongoing, and I'm sure a lot more information will come out of COP16, but then that is one way we can take part. And then the other thing we need to do is take part in monitoring and reporting. So monitoring by conducting assessments of progress. How are we doing with the implementation? And then by collecting data and sharing that, we'll be able to, at least from the data and information that we gather after our analysis, we'll be able to at least shape shape the processes, provide insights, and now contribute even to the national biodiversity databases. So that harmonizes our efforts as a country, and that will also help support improved decision-making processes. The other thing is, once we have the information on on our progress, how we are doing with the implementation, then we can utilize that data to keep, from the progress assessment, to hold implementing agencies accountable and stakeholders, and including the private sector, because the activities that also we can say affect the environment, and we can commit and say that at least this is how we will be able to address our impacts on biodiversity and the environment in general. The other thing we can do is awareness raising, beginning with NBSAP. So we've learned today what NBSAP entails, and we know what the broader biodiversity issues are, and we can actually play an active role in making sure that everyone understands how they also fit into that, this process of implementing the NBSAP. So once we follow the process I've just shared, and we get to see all the 23 targets and what they each say, then at least we'll be good to go in terms of making sure everyone is on board. We have knowledge sharing and capacity building that we can also do as CSOs. So sharing the best practices. How do we make this successful? How do we make it work? We can organize training sessions, of course, and make sure that we build capacities of those who are able to play an active role, just enhance capacities and make sure these things work. Engaging and empowering communities and vulnerable groups. So we often talk about the local communities participating in these processes and integrating local knowledge and addressing communities' needs. So just make sure that our work aligns with the National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan, because all these are provided for at the NBSAP. So we look at the 23 targets, and that is the assignment that I'd like to give each and every one of you who's, especially those learning about the targets today as we speak, so that at least we look at the Global Biodiversity Framework targets and then the NBSAP targets, and see where we can play an active role. The vulnerable groups, we often talk about the persons with disabilities, we have indigenous people, we have the young people, we have the women. So including them to ensure full, equitable, and inclusive participation in implementation of the NBSAP and decision making. And then also supporting sustainable livelihoods projects in line with the NBSAP. So human rights-based approach is also key. So we need to make sure that whatever we do align with human rights standards, and also the biodiversity policies and management and governance respect human rights and actively promote them, especially in the design and implementation. And we also address inequalities and power balances. So just making sure that everyone is on fold and no human rights is violated in the process of implementing our activities. Dr. Lucy spoke about mainstreaming and put an emphasis on that as the government target. I know mainstreaming can be challenging, so just advocating for integration, especially across all levels and sectors, including our finance plans in the country, so as to make it easier to finance biodiversity. So advocacy along those lines is still key. And also allocating resources. So just making sure that resources are allocated to biodiversity conservation, even at the treasury level, as Lucy to an extent alluded to. So that will be very, very, very crucial, especially when we get to the point where we are able to finance biodiversity. Policy review, very important. So we look at the policy gaps what are some of the policies that hinder effective implementation of NBSAP. It can be along the lines of harmful subsidies. So then we are able to advocate for more effective policies to be able to drive the process. Harmonization and synergy, this is very crucial. So we look at our efforts. We normally have disjointed efforts across the country. So the work that we do as CSOs, the work that is done by the government, how do we come together? And that is what at some point, this was also highlighted. Kenya launched the National Biodiversity Coordination Mechanism. And this mechanism, at least now we can say, for the first time, we'll be able to have a more harmonized and coordinated approach to biodiversity conservation. That means at least we will have more impact. So the coordination mechanism, as Dr. Lucy also mentioned, brings together both state and non-state actors. That means CSOs are also part of that coordination mechanism. I know CSOs normally have funding constraints and capacity limitations, but then again, making sure we align our processes, especially with the global processes. At the national level, global level, it normally makes it easier to also raise funds to implement activities on the ground and also address capacity limitations. So I wanted to, as I wind up, I wanted to mention some of the resources that we can refer to, like the one developed by WWF network, that is the the NBSAPs we need, and some of the criteria that is also crucial. But then as I finalize, there is this quote that I like from David Attenborough that says, you can form all the committees, all the working groups you like, but know that in the end, it is that one individual that has passion, that one individual that has fire in the belly, that one individual that is determined that something should be done. So even as we speak about getting all these things done, at least we should be able to lead these efforts and be self-driven as different organizations and even as individuals to be able to get effective work done. So with that, asanteni sana, and yes, God bless you.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. You see lots of applause coming in digitally. So you've really done a great job unpacking the NBSAP here in Kenya and how we can understand them better, how we can find more information about them, and how we as non-state actors can engage. Much appreciated. And now we're moving into the final stage of today's seminar or webinar, and I would like to co-invite my colleague Faith as we embark in this Q&A session, because there's been lots of questions coming in, and I will start up straight away. But Faith, please feel free to help me monitor the chat box, and then we can take maybe alternate questions or something like that. But I would like to start with one of the questions that has come in on several occasions. So I will not take one at a go, but I will try to combine them. And that is the question of how non-state actors have been part of the process developing the targets in Kenya for the NBSAP targets. And there's been particular emphasis on how youth and indigenous and community groups have been in the past now in this development of the process, but also can be consulted and involved and included in the process going forward. So I would like to address that question maybe first to you, Lucy, Dr. Lucy, if you're still around, and then I can also allow Jonathan, who has been part of the process, to comment a bit as well, since this is your topic. So Dr. Lucy, could you tell us a little bit about how the government process has been within your department, and how groups such as youth groups, indigenous group, community groups can be involved further in as we go along with finalizing these targets?
Sure. And thank you very much. Actually, that was one of the questions I had already listed from the chat. It's very gratifying to note that people are always keen in those balances because they matter, even as most of them were also entrenched in our national constitution, is because without following such formats, people tend to move in a certain trajectory and it's not inclusive. For this process for the NBSAP, I can very confidently tell you, and I have witnesses who are on this call, that the youth, the women, and even the communities are engaged. And I'll tell you why, because we cannot have all the youths who are working in this space on the table, or even the conservation organizations, or even the women. What we have done as a government is to ensure that we do invitations to the umbrella bodies that coordinate that. And one of the key participants of this discussion today is Kevin. Kevin is in this wall, and Kevin is one of the key leaders of the Global Youth Network. And he's been with us in this process of review, not him as an individual, his organization. There is a chapter of, there's a Kenya Youth Network that is a chapter of the Global Youth Network. And the members of that group on alternate basis, even though Kevin, I think, attends most of the meetings, there's no sitting we have had in target review and the process of NBSAP, even in the review of the consultancies that we are doing without them on board. For the women, we have the network for the women and the indigenous people. We have the indigenous people, the one that is led by Lucy Morenge. I'm sure most of you know her. That organization has always been represented not just by one, but by two participants who also happen to be ladies who are young. So I always tell them they are like coming as from that community, but they are young. But what has come on the table is that, like when we were doing Target 2 ICRAF, they really engaged the people from that restoration discussion on how at their community level they need to be plugged in. So the engagement of women, youth, and indigenous and communities in general, is in this process. It is really a whole government, whole society. And we can attest to that even when we do our reports. We attach the participants who have come to our meetings. In one sitting, we always have between 50 and 60 packs, because that's what our budget can also entail. You cannot have a workshop of 200 people, but we try to go to the lead organizations, maybe just precisely to say that. And I've seen somebody in relation to that question asking how they can join. Our email is there. We can provide the email, and then you can link up with the people in the ministry who are coordinating this. Then we can find out which organization you plug into, and maybe your organization can nominate you to be part of this. But when you go back to the organization, you make sure. And that's why I think we've been very successful even with the partners like WWF, IUCN, and everybody else, because the few that participate, they take it back. And I guess that's why maybe I'm even in this wall being invited into this platform, because of the work we have done with maybe 2 or 3 members from WWF, but the word has gone out there. But also when they sit with us, they represent that fraternity interest in the review. Believe you me, Emma, when we are doing this, we really have a very heated discussion, of course, balancing the government, space, and also government understanding. You can't go that way. This is the way the community wants, and balancing that in our targets. And I can't wait for people on this wall and others to look at what our targets are, because we'll have an opportunity to review them again in the very final validation. We were asked to submit now, but we'll really do a final validation when we are now putting them in the final NBSAP that we shall launch. Emma?
Thank you so much, Lucy, for this elaborate answer. And I really want to reiterate the opportunity we have as networks and organizations to share amongst one another. I really want to reiterate what you said, that if you are an organization who have access to these spaces, such as WWF, maybe Kenya for Resilience, maybe the Youth Network, if you are part of one of those, you can also drop your contacts or your website down in this chat box if you want to connect with other members of the meeting today, and for other members to find you, so that we can share more information amongst each other, because that's what we also have to do as non-governmental actors and civil society actors, and that's our at least that's my champion from today, that I think we're such a big network of engaged individuals around Kenya, so we have to collaborate on these things. And thank you so much, Peter, for adding your email in the box. Feel free to do so as well, those of you who want. Faith, do you have a question that you want to take on next, or should I go with another one?
Yes, maybe I know we've talked a bit about, Dr. Lucy has really done a good job in answering a lot of similar questions on the chat box. And maybe what I could add on and maybe ask either Dr. Lucy or Jonathan to come in is I see these are two questions tied on the mention of human rights-based approach within Kenya's NBSAPs. And there's a question on, are there any youth indicators in the national report and inclusion? And I want to put this together with the question by Joyce on, are there plans to develop gender equity and social inclusion mainstreaming in the action plan? So gender inclusion and gender equality and social inclusion, as well as youth indicators, are these present within the NBSAPs for Kenya? And I think I'll hand it over to Jonathan to go in first, and then we could go from there. Thank you. Jonathan, take the floor.
Okay, thank you very much. I don't know whether to answer that or if Dr. Lucy should answer. Dr. should I deflect it to you?
The one
You
for
can
the
throw it
gender,
back. That's okay.
Yeah.
Now,
Yes.
yeah, you're right. This is an issue I had also it's one of the questions I've noted because gender is key. And I tell people we have moved from the days when gender used just to be put as a name in a document. And when somebody complains there is no gender, you are told to scan the document and you see gender is mentioned twice. It's not a matter of mentioning. And it's the same even when you say, is there a youth target? You see, the way the targets are not put, the gender lens, there is a target 23. These targets, for your information, were usually 22 all along until the last meeting in a lobby before we went to Montreal, when target 23 was born, to include the girls and women, agenda into it. And of course, it brought a lot of heat because they wanted another one for boys, and that story for another day. So the target, there is a target for that, but also you'll find that in the target, gender issues are also integrated, because just like we have integrated issues of IPLCs, indigenous people and local communities, because in every aspect, whether it's the target of resource mobilization, conservation, invasive species, all those are affecting women, indigenous people, they're affecting other people who are not within that bracket. So the mainstreaming is also is done within the target, even though a target on the person was asking about issues of gender, target 22 and 23 have dealt in that. But when you start unpackaging the target, you'll find that along the way you also find that it is integrated, because we are out of the space where gender was just taken like just mention it so that the gender people keep quiet. No, it's integrated. The only thing that as a country we are lacking behind, I must admit, is that we are yet to appoint a gender focal point for CBD. And I think that's work in the progress, because we already have received the notification from the CBD Secretariat. So the ministry is working on that. We are working around. Sometimes we get a challenge when you want to get a focal point for gender, and then you try to go to the entities that are dealing with the gender. But then when you go there's nobody who is an expert that has expertise in biodiversity. So you are now like, do you go back to your institution and get somebody who has something in gender and biodiversity? Otherwise, you will get a focal point who may not even understand what they're up to. But I think we'll be working on that in terms of the focal point. But in terms of integration in the targets, that is well covered. Globally, there were no gray areas. Globally, as we negotiated the 23 targets, there were no gray areas. We can only have gray areas when we come to domesticate. And I guess the interested parties will not let us go there. We'll make sure that it's fully integrated. I don't know whether apart from gender, was there something else Emma was supposed to respond to?
No, I think that's good for now. Thank you so much.
Okay.
And if there was anything else that we lost in this answer, you can we can put it in the chat box and we can address it. I wanted to ask a question that came into the Q&A function, because we have questions coming in all over the place right now, and I love it. And I might I might address this to either Innocent or Jonathan, and it's about the 30 by 30 commitments. So for those of you who are still a bit unfamiliar with the targets, one of the targets that is at the global level is referring to something called 30 by 30, which is protecting 30% of our now you have to correct me later, Innocent, because I'm a little bit tired, but 30% of our like nature reserves as well as coastal lands. But you'll correct me exactly what the framing is. But there also been a little bit of controversy of these around these kind of targets, so that like because it also has a tendency of leaving out communities and indigenous groups living in those areas and who are part and parcel of the ecosystem there. So how can we understand some of these targets from from these perspectives, and how can we make sure that the 30 by 30 ensures that communities are included, consulted, and supported also in these protection processes? It's a little bit of a tricky question, but I'm thinking if maybe Innocent, you would like to say something about this first, and then maybe Jonathan or anyone else who wants to can come in after.
I can take it. So this target 3 is a protected area target, which aims to have 30% of land and sea effectively conserved through protected areas. So what I would like to say, maybe to answer, because it's very hard to give a straight answer to this, is that when I was making the presentation about the GBF, oh, I forgot that I had put my camera off, so maybe it helps if you can see me speaking. So when I was speaking about the presentation that I made about how the framework is wired about, I did talk about the outline of this framework, in that it has a background and purpose, it has considerations for implementation, and it has other areas such as relationship with the 2030 agenda and the SDGs. So in fact, I will invite the colleague who asked this question, and indeed all of us, to try and understand more about these targets. And if you go to the CBD website, there's actually a very good explanation of what this target is all about. There's even a section which talks about the links to other elements of Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, as well as other frameworks and processes. And it's very clearly stated that actions to reach target 3 should take into account all the considerations for implementation identified in section C of the Kunming-Montreal Biodiversity Framework, which focuses on many considerations, and one of them is inclusivity. And the other issue is that if you look at the NBSAPs we need, I think it's very clear that that all efforts taken to implement the GBF targets, not only target 3, are supposed to be implemented in a whole of government and whole of society approach, as well as a human rights-based approach. So the whole of government approach means that it will be taking care of all the ministries at government level, but then whole of society means brings on board everybody. Daktari has explained about how the process of coming up with the NBSAP for Kenya was taken, which included the perspective and participation, active, not just participation by nominal participation, but indeed active participation by representatives of the indigenous people, which then makes sure that all the efforts and the plans already take place, having started with the inputs of this very important constituency. And that is what I'd like to say, that in all these targets, there's always, it's not just about the target that you read. I think there's a lot of background that needs to be pursued, and all of that is supposed to be translated into how the action plan is going to run out. In fact, even the indicators that they will be developed for the NBSAPs need to be able to take out some of these markers that will ensure that the interest of, for instance, indigenous peoples not only the interest, but the welfare and their contribution are taken into consideration. I hope that helps. I will, for instance, let me just share a link to target 3 as explained by the CBD
Yeah, thank you. That's
secretary.
perfect.
Yeah, that's
You can
going
put
to be
the
quite...
link in the chat box.
Yes, I've
Great.
put that there. So if you look at target 3, you should be able to see the other explanatory notes around it, and also the link to the NBSAPs we did has been shared by Faith, I believe. So I think that should be helpful. I don't know if Jonathan, you want to add on to this?
I think that's pretty much clear, Innocent. That's okay. Yeah.
Thank you. Faith, do you have a question for us?
Yes, Emma, there's an interesting question here by Teresa on what kind of funding opportunities CSOs and other organizations, other grassroots organizations can leverage through the NBSAPs. And I see a similar question on FLOCA. So maybe I would go back to Dr. Lucy and maybe put you on the spot, and anyone else would be happy to contribute in terms of, are there any funding opportunities that organizations and grassroots people can tap into?
Hey, Dr. Lucy, are you still here?
Sorry, Emma. Okay, sorry. It's oh, come again, please. Sorry.
Sorry about that. Yeah, no problem, Dr. So the question is, what funding opportunities can CSOs and other grassroots organizations tap into in regards to the NBSAPs? And yeah, how can they tap into funding opportunities? That is the question.
Okay, apologies. I think something that's the issue when you take up a meeting and you're in the office. Something always
No
comes
problem.
up. But yeah, so colleagues, apologies. I think the issue of funding, like I said, why the Aichi targets were not achieved. Among the many things, of course, I don't like saying it's always the funds. There are many other things. Funds were key because before you source the funds, you must have a plan. And that's why we are doing the biodiversity resource mobilization plan. So even as we do this, every entity must appreciate the need to plan on resource mobilization. And the reason is because you could feel like there are many resources out there, but there is always, the plan helps you to be more innovative because the conventional way of fundraising is also becoming fatigued. So you have to be, you have to be innovative. Now, biodiversity issues globally are mainly funded through GEF, Global Environment Facility. Those of you who are participating in the negotiations know that we were really pushing for a fund equivalent or similar to the GCF for climate that is domiciled under the convention. And because we did achieve that in Montreal, at the wee hours of the morning, we agreed to a GBFF, Global Biodiversity Framework Fund, that is still at the GEF again. And the GEF, the challenges of accessing that, even though it has helped us quite to do a lot, but we wanted a further than a convention where we can even have a way of communities directly applying for a fund, and they're able to do, maybe a community only need like 10 million or 5 million, and they do so much with that. But with the current arrangement from Jeff, you realize that you have to have, a UN accredited entity and all that gymnastics around there. Now, coming to the question of how the CSO can access funding, I think this is usually an open space in terms of resource mobilization. And I'm yet to understand now if a fund is floated, like not to understand, but the GEF fund is how you can work with the GEF fund is to establish an institution that has has interest of putting a proposal, and you plug to them. And I've seen that work with some of the big projects that if a UN entity is looking for a government agency and a community-based community to work, then you plug your activities into that and resource mobilize together. That can be so. But from the government side, unless we get a funding like FLOCA that comes through the treasury to fund biodiversity, and then it can come through the counties, the way FROCA is funding the climate change aspects in the counties. It's from where I sit, it's like I may not have a direct answer into that. I think institutions and entities and organizations must be innovative in drawing first a plan that is innovative, and finding out there how they can plug to other entities and resource mobilize together. I think I've seen benefit of resource mobilizing together. Even when I said earlier that we have gotten support from WWF, it's amazing that when we sit with WWF, IUCN, TNC, you find there are even entities they are funding, they are working together out there. IUCN and WWF are working together, and they are speaking on how they can support us. So I think this working together partnerships, and that's why we developed the NBCM, the coordination mechanism, because through it, when you participate, you'll be finding linkages and partnerships that can help you fundraise. So there may not be a straight answer, but it's good to find out there who is resource mobilizing for a bigger fund and how you can plug in as a smaller entity, or which entity is calling for proposals for little money, which can, as an institution, you are eligible, because eligibility criteria also is the one sometimes that limits institutions that are, not very big to plug here. There has also been challenges in getting enough funding agency to fund communities directly. They are there, very few, but I guess that I would, the people in that space maybe could have to, maybe invited, and they let us know. But from where I sit as government, we have had our challenges, and we are trying to plug in through the institutions like UN agencies. We're also trying to lobby through the mainstreaming I've talked of, Target 14. We get mainstream so that we can also access the exchequer, because this biodiversity for this country is supposed to benefit the taxpayers, and the taxpayers' money go to treasury. So we should be able also, as a people, be able to plug there. And I think when we develop the resource mobilization strategy, because it will be also very consultative, maybe in it, let us also put avenues where CSOs and other small entities who are working in this space can get even funding from our own exchequer. Emma?
Wow, thank you so much, Lucy. That sounds like a good plan. I'm looking forward to seeing more information about this. We are approaching the end of our seminar today, and I just want to throw out the very, very last question as we close, which is to all of you, but perhaps I'll address it to Mary or Jonathan and those of you who are coming from the non-government sector. And that is, it's been coming up many, many times, and that is, how can we continue this engagement beyond this session? Those of us who don't have funds or ability to travel to Colombia to attend these global meetings or in these processes, how can we continue building our capacity and engagement with the NBSAP process and with this global biodiversity process? And as you prepare to answer that, I will share a poll for today. So you can find that one in the chat box, but please go ahead and finish with our last question for today. Jonathan or Mary, whoever is quickest.
That's very tricky, Emma, because then it depends on who puts the mic on first. Jonathan, can I just comment and then maybe you come in?
Yeah, it's okay.
You're already on it.
Thank you. Yeah, Dr. Lucy has talked about the coordination mechanism. I think we can engage very much on the coordination when the implementation of NBSAP comes. She said that once everything is ready, would engage. There is going to be a framework that is going to be developed. So I think we can engage, but post Colombia, what I think is that we could actually have more webinar like this, or maybe a continuation of this, and maybe we'll be able to share the learnings of Colombia and how CSOs come in and how we can actually engage with the government. And as we had said earlier, we don't want things to run in silos, but actually engaging and making sure that every relevant person is brought on board. So I think we can actually have another webinar just to bring what came out in Colombia, what is happening globally, what is happening in Kenya, and maybe could also help us in even holding the government accountable, because now when the CSOs come in, we can actually ask, how far are we on this? How can we leverage on our competencies and experience and actually converge the issues of resilience and make sure that biodiversity is given the same attention or even more, just like the climate change issues. So I think we can help a CSO to bring that convergence of how biodiversity and resilience can work together. Jonathan, you want to add something?
You have 30 seconds, Jonathan.
No problem. I think from my end, I think also Mary has sort of mentioned quite a number of things. But this question about engagement again ties to the previous question on funding that also Dr. Lucy answered. In terms of, I think both issues are all about positioning ourselves, and also when it comes to funding, let me just begin with that for a few seconds. When it comes to that, I know most funding opportunities do not present themselves as this is to implement GBF or something like that. But as also was mentioned earlier, Dr. Lucy said stakeholders are picking targets to run with. So if, for example, your strength is in addressing gender issues and gender in relation to biodiversity, you might find funding that is in line with that, and that will help you address target 23, for example. So that is one way. So that positioning is key, and aligning our work, just like I mentioned earlier, with these global processes and conventions, as well as our national processes. So the second one is about the meetings. So one thing that normally happens, I think if you look at the UNFCCC, the climate change conference, and then the UNCBD, they've always been for CSOs, the post-COP meetings that we can take advantage of and at least share our thoughts and at least learn, for those who might not be able to attend, what might have transpired. And then there are also on occasions pre-COP meetings, but then again, that is to prepare CSOs, normally prepare country positions as well in terms of expectations and all, and then also the government, the country position. So we can take advantage of that. And then the last one is about when the conferences are running and you're not able to participate physically, normally there is the option of the virtual sessions, especially those plenary sessions are normally there's normally live streaming that we can also follow. Some sessions also have live streaming, though not all might have that, but then again, we can keep following and then follow some of those links and follow the proceedings and also keep engaging. So yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. Yes, I will reiterate that. Do check all the links that have been placed in this chat box to the Global Biodiversity Convention, to Kenya for Resilience, to WWF Kenya. And I'm so grateful for all of you who have put your email addresses in the chat. That way I can, and we in this organizing team can also support you by sending out some of these presentation slides if you want to after the session. And if you would want to reach us at Kenya for Resilience, I put our email in this box as well, and I'm sure that Jonathan and Faith can do the same if one would want to get in touch with WWF. So with this, 7 minutes past the hour, I would like to thank you all for coming in today, for having such a interactive and intense 2 hours discussing biodiversity resilience and how to unpack the NBSAPs. So have a good day, everyone, and see you around.
Thank you.
Thank you, Emma.
And thank you, everyone.